Hey, and welcome back to the next video on the series on Claude Code. In this video, I'm going to be talking to you about everything about context engineering, which I won't go into in too much detail. Instead, I'll give you links and the people that you should be following as the space evolves. But I really want you to understand the importance of context engineering and why it's much more than just prompt engineering. And I'll also set up with you in this video an example of how to set up your Claude Code in a live project that I resurrected after 4 years. So it's very out of date. I haven't looked at it at all. So I haven't really done much changing to it to make it modern. So it'll be a very much a similar situation of what you may experience in the workplaces or in a personal project as you're using Claude Code in a code base that you don't know anything about. And I do know something about this code base because I wrote it, but that was almost half a decade ago. So I don't remember a lot. In fact, I don't remember most of it. So let's get started without further ado. Now, the first and most important thing that I really want you guys to understand is that there is a mechanism that underlies all of AI engineering, which is engineering using LLMs. A couple of years ago, everyone was obsessed with prompt engineering. And as you can imagine, the models have evolved multiple times exponentially since 2023 and 2024. Every few months, there's a big leap in the ability of the models, right? It may not always be exponential change, but it's pretty much step changes every time. And so what we've noticed in the industry now is that a lot of the prompt engineering continues to be very important, but now it's called context engineering because it's a lot more than just the prompts the end user, that is you, write. Context is about manipulating what goes into the attention window of a given model. As models get stronger and stronger and better, they're able to use that context much better. And it's actually quite astonishing how much they can do with it, okay? But context is everything when it comes to the LLM, which is why context engineering is far more important than anything that you could otherwise do in terms of actually having the maximum uplift for your program. Now, let me quickly share with you a couple of resources, and I'll link to these. But the first one that I recommend you all read is this article, this blog by Anthropic, and it was published in September 29 about effective context engineering for AI agents, right? It is an extraordinarily useful read. And it explained to you what the difference between prompt engineering and context engineering is, why context engineering is so important and essential to actually build out effective agents, what an effective context looks like, what your role is, how you manage context and the context window for a given LLM. And all of this will make a lot more sense as we step through things. Also recommend you look at the Claude docs or the Anthropic docs, which is, if you look specifically on how to build with Claude, the prompting best practices section, very useful to understand because again, once you read effective engineering or effective context engineering with prompts, you will then be able to make a lot more sense about the prompting best practices as well, right? And all of this in the context of Claude goes into managing Claude's memory. Now, we'll talk about this in a moment. For now, we don't really need to address the memory thing because we'll do that organically as I walk through Claude Code with you. But what's really important about context is to remember that it's really all the information from all the different sources, including you're a source of information that goes in to the LLM's context window. The context window, think of it as a table onto which you're piling on the books and the articles and the printouts that the LLM is going to need. Those sources, those books, those articles, those printouts, whatever information is on the desk for the LLM can come from different sources, right? So very often they could be in your actual prompt, or it could be pieces of text you add to that prompt. This is where RAG, retrieval augmented generation, people think that's, all of context engineering. It's not, it's a piece of context engineering. There's also web search, web fetch. These are tools that Claude now has added into its ecosystem, and other LLMs also allow you to do that. Gemini for sure does something called grounding, which is it backs things up with Google searches. It retrieves those links. In fact, I recently did a demo for work on stage where we used Google Gemini's grounding. So these are all ways of putting information, injecting or inserting information into the LLM's context window, onto its desk, into its workspace, right? And that's a way of managing its memory. Now, with that information in its memory, you need to be a little bit careful about how you manage it. As context windows grow bigger, you can add a lot more text and input into the context window. However, there is something called context rot. And for that, I strongly recommend you look at this article by Leighton Space. In fact, look at all the videos by Leighton Space and what Swix and his team have done. Extraordinarily useful stuff, right? I mean, this is a pretty bold statement, RAG is dead, but I can see why they say that. But more importantly, it talks about the importance of context rot. This is a separate blog or a separate video on the Latent Space channel. It talks about what happens when there's too much context in a given window. It does result in something called context rot, which is a degradation in performance. So going back to effective context engineering, you need to control what's in the context of the LLM to make sure its attention mechanism is most properly pointed at the right things, which means you need to sometimes add context, sometimes you need to remove context, sometimes you need to compress it, sometimes you need to prune it, sometimes you need to externalize it into your file system and then tell Claude where it can go and pick it up. So for example, if I am reviewing 5 blogs or 5 archive papers, right, if heavy scientific papers, I could put all of that paper text into my context, right? Or I could just put the URL into the context, which reduces my token usage dramatically, but also gives the model the ability to say, hey, if you really need to know what's in this, go away and look at it, okay? Now that's at the heart of what things like LLM's text do, for example. An LLM's text file will simply be a URL with a brief 1 to 3 sentence, maybe 4 sentence blurb or summary on what can be found in that URL, which then prompts the LLM saying, hey, if this blurb has information that you think you need, then fetch it from this URL and then inject that into your context, and then you can prune that out later. As you can imagine, since agents couldn't be as simple as chaining a bunch of LLM calls together, it may not be the same model. And do all of those agents or all of those models need the exact same context? Probably not. Each agent will need a different set of instructions, and potentially, depending on your use case, may require completely different information. Now, code review agents also, different stages of the game require different pieces of information. You don't have to put everything into the context. So this is why I want to emphasize to you how important context is for agents, because LLMs have very limited what's known as attention budgets, okay? So effective agents require very careful curation of the context and what's in it to avoid things like context rot, to avoid things like hallucinations or ingesting too much rubbish information that then diverts or sidetracks the LLM and also makes it much more expensive to run. So managing context windows means you also reduce the number of input tokens and you reduce the number of output tokens if you prompt it correctly, all of which helps a lot, because often in agentic workflows, the output token from one agent becomes the input tokens for the next agent. And so you end up having this double, triple, quadruple payment for the same tokens that are being passed around to all these agents. So to effectively manage context, you use things like clear system prompts, right? You use things like tools. RAG is essentially a tool. So is web search, so is web fetch, so is contacting an MCP server, which I'll show you in the subsequent video when I'm talking about the MCP servers used in Claude Code. All of these things are ways to retrieve information, perform some calculations, load a file, read your file system, run bash scripts, etc., all of which can be done without having to invoke the LLM, but then you get the output of those operations, and that output is given to the LLM, which saves a lot in tokens and computations, makes it much more efficient, but it also means you're retrieving and updating the context at the time when it's relevant for the LLM and not just bloating your context window with all kinds of stuff before you actually need it. At some point in time, you need to do a compaction on it, or you need to externalize it, or you need to do a combination of both, right? Compaction is you make a really good summary. In fact, it's such a hard problem that there are some models that are specifically being fine-tuned on compaction and summarizing, because it's such an important problem in agentic workflows, especially to keep costs down, right? The other thing you can do is give the agent a to-do or note-taking tool so that it can track its own progress. It's a way of controlling its attention. Just like you and I could start a day thinking, gosh, I have 100 things to do, and then you write a to-do list and you're like, I only want to focus on these 5, all the other stuff I don't need to worry about right now. And then as the day goes on, you keep checking in on those 5 to make sure that your attention is correctly directed at the things that matter. It's the same principle for LLMs, right? You give them a tool that does a to-do list, and then you'll end up finding that it's able to stick to its own to-dos in that way. So hopefully this gives you a sense of how important context engineering is. Now, in fact, there is a school of thought like LangChain clearly believes, and I think this does make a lot of sense to me, that really there's only 4 things that an agentic system or a deep research agent, for example, would need in order to be successful. Now, of course, it's a short list, but it conceals a lot of detail, a lot of engineering complexity. But really, in the opinion of LangChain, and I kind of agree with this, really all you need is this: a detailed system prompt, A planning tool, which is like what I told you, it controls the attention at various points of time. Sub agents, so you can think of it as threading off to other agents, multi-threading with agents. Not quite, but it's the same mental model. And you give each agent its own context window, which is not polluted by the context of other agents, and then access to the file system and potentially other tools such as bash tools and so on and so forth, right? This is also a very good blog that I recommend you read, and it's worth looking into this to understand what they mean by this. Okay, so all this to say that as LLMs improve, as the models get better and better, as the frontier models keep advancing and getting more powerful, it's up to us as the AI engineer to thoughtfully curate the context of what goes into the attention window, the context window of the LLM, and what needs to be removed or pruned, because that's going to help us build reliable and effective agents. So in the rest of this video, I'm going to actually show you in my IDE how I would set up Claude in a given project and some of the key commands that I'd use. And let's actually see, I'll do it real time. So it's a bit risky. This is kind of like live coding. Unlike other channels, I don't typically try and curate the stuff too much to make it look too polished, because I think from an engineer's point of view, or if you're an aspiring engineer, it's really important for you to learn by seeing the mistakes that happen. If you see only the end result, you don't see all the decisions and you lose all the learning that goes into actual engineering. So with that said, let's take a look at my IDE, and hopefully that's zoomed in enough. I'm using Cursor for this. And here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you how you run Claude. Now, hopefully in the previous video, you would have seen how to install Claude. You can just do an npm install. You can do that. npm install g at Anthropic/Claude Code latest, right? And you can get it into your system that way globally. And then all you have to do is, how I use it is in the terminal. Some people may want to use the VS Code extension, and I think it's available for Cursor as well. I just use it in the terminal this way. Now, sorry about the bad typing. I do have a broken hand and only 2 fingers on this hand work. Okay, so let me just show you how. So this is kind of how you open Claude Code, okay? And I'll show you all the secrets in a moment. But this is the old project that I have. I have installed my node modules. The back end is actually Firebase functions, and the front end is an old React app. You can see it's very, very old. It's not even using things like a Next.js or any of that. So, this is before Next.js became really big, so about 4 or 5 years ago. And this is the project I did just before Google, really just to keep myself busy during the pandemic. In fact, it says that in the actual web page when it builds. Now, the first thing we want to do is Claude init, which will, as you can see, it'll initialize a new Claude.md file with the Codebase documentation. And now I'll talk to you, as it does that, I will talk to you about what that does and memory. So as you can see, you click it and the UI just tells you what's going on. So if I just open that up, and now if I actually do, I think if I can do Control O, it tells me everything that it's done. Control O, detailed transcript, right? So it tells me the details of what it's doing. If I do Control E, all 36, let me just maximize that. So now you can see I did, initialize a Claude MD file, immediately tried to read this particular directory. It said illegal operational directory, and then it instead went into the actual package, into the actual files. Look at what it's doing. It's reading all these files, and then it uses a bash search pattern to understand what's in all of these different configuration files. It read my front end package JSON. It read my back end, the functions package JSON, that's Firebase functions. It searched for things. You can see all the details here. And I got these details by doing Control O. And then it said, look, okay, I have all the information I need. Now look what it did. It systematically used tools in a loop, right? It did search, it did reads in a loop to collect information and put it into its context, its own context. Now, if this is an empty project, it would just produce an empty Claude.md file, right? And it usually does that in the project root, but it basically read through all these files. It understood the project structure, and it said, hey, let me check one more key file to understand the API structure. And it looked at my server.ts in the functions directory, which is the backend. It understood, it read the 50 lines, it read 25 lines of the index.ts, which is the main entry point. And now it says, okay, I have all the information I need, and off we go, right? Now, let me just minimize that. And you can see what happened is I'm closing the terminal, and you can see that Claude MD has proposed a brand new file. So it's got this entire file, and normally I would just say, okay, it's asking me instructions, right? It's saying, okay, it's writing in a Claude.md file, and now it's saying, do you want to make this edit to Claude.md? I'm just going to say yes and allow all edits to the session. The reason I do this is because I use Git version control, and I commit fairly frequently, I'm not worried about making changes. It's easier for me to read without all the reds and greens if I need to review something that's completely new. If obviously I'm diffing against an existing file, it'll be different. And then you can also say no if you want and tell Claude what you want to do differently. I'm going to go with yes, allow all edits and during the session. And note that this is how Claude Code is designed. And in fact, a lot of these tools nowadays are designed this way. They will allow you to control the permission set, right? So I'm going to do 2. And now you can see it's actually receiving more than 2,000 tokens. And let's see what it's saying about itself, because it's reflecting on itself, right? First it said, okay, I'm going to do all of this stuff. And then it said, great, I've created a comprehensive MD file for this repo. This is what I've included, right? And it talks about all the things it included. And let's take a look at the Claude.md file. Okay, now this is great because this is actually correct. It is a weekly digest app. It doesn't work anymore because it broke a couple of years ago and I never bothered to fix it on the back end. And with the Zoho integration, I probably need to switch to SendGrid, to be honest. But basically what it does is it sends users the links that they wanted to revisit. So for example, what I do is all through the week, there are links, for example, all these blogs that I may want to read and I may not have time at the time. So I send myself an email at a specific email address that's connected to this app with all these links. And then at the end of the week, the Firebase app will run a cron job and it'll pull out all the links against my account from the past 7 days and then send me an email digest with all those links, right? So it is a full stack application. Yep, React front end correct, Express backend correct, Firebase functions, which is what it is. That's correct. And Firebase Firestore database, that's correct. Perfect. That's exactly what it does. So this is basically the memory for Claude now, right? It gives you a whole lot of information. And most importantly, it gives Claude information about how to run different tools, because Claude can run these tools. Claude can run Yarn front end, right? Anything that a human being can type into the terminal as a command, Claude can type into its own terminal as a command, which is what tool use is all about. And so it tells you the entire setup, how the whole thing's done. Okay, great. So this is the Claude.md file. Now let me go back here. And now what happens if I want to check what's in the memory, right? It says edit Claude memory files using the /memory command. Now let's talk about Claude memory. There are types of Claude memory, right? So forget about enterprise for a moment because most of you will not need to think about that, but it's useful to know. Really, there are 3 major types that you need to know about. And again, this is in the Claude docs. Project memory is a ./ClaudeMD file. That is memory for a particular project, right? So this is the Claude.md file in the project root. It could also be inside a .claude folder. It would still work the same way. And it's for the project. It's meant to be checked into your source control. Okay, it's meant to be checked to GitHub if you use that. So, and the reason for that is other people who then develop on this project will have access to the exact same Claude memory for their Claude Code sessions. Okay, it's kind of similar to what agent.md does for other agents. In fact, I suspect, I'm pretty sure Claude Code would also pick up an agents.md, but Claude, the model is specifically trained to pick up on this, right? Now you can have a user memory, which is not just for a particular project, but for all of your projects in your computer, right? So you have this at the user level, not the project level, right? And so that's going to be done in your home folder, that /.claude folder, ClaudeMD, right? So it's for all projects. So the project memory is team shared instructions, user memory is personal preference for all your projects, and that you may typically want to manually do in your own. Now, project memory local is in .claude.local.md, which is very specific to the developer. It's typically not meant to be checked in, but usually, now this has been deprecated and because of a new thing called Sandbox. If you watched the first video, I talked about the Sandbox runtime, but there's a new sort of way to do this. But you can still technically use this and not check it in because it's your personal project preferences. Now, if you go back to the memory/memory command, you'll see that it tells you which memory do you want to edit, right? Now, I actually don't want to edit anything, so I'm going to escape that out. I'm going to minimize my terminal. And what I'm going to do here right at the top, or maybe right at the bottom, I'm going to put here instructions to Claude, right? And I'm going to put this in a general, wow, this is hard with one hand, general instructions to Claude. And in this, I'm going to say, be brief and direct, minimize the use of output tokens. That's just to keep costs down, but it also forces it to be much more concise on its responses because it can have a tendency to over communicate or to be quite verbose in its response. The next one I want to do is, you see, a lot of the AI LLMs can sometimes make up things. Now, it doesn't make up things as they get better and you give them better context, but I also want to make it explicit. I want to say, if you don't know the answer to something, say so explicitly. Do not, oh man, this is a hard one. And do not make things up ever. And then I also want to say, if you're not sure about your proposed changes, first discuss them with me before making changes to files. You must always follow this rule. Now, I may say that, and sometimes I may still ignore it depending on whether the context has been pruned, whether it's not been there, etc. So sometimes compaction can affect these things, but I suspect the model is also trained to try and preserve important rules as much as it can. So now we have a Claude.md file. I'm going to just go to my root here, and I'm going to do git status, and I'm going to commit it. Add, whoops, that came on camera. Git commit, add Claude.md with init. Let's go back to our Claude code. Now, the next thing that I want to try and do is help you understand all the other commands. Now, we won't go into any of these in details, but I'd encourage you to look up the Claude Code documentation for all these slash commands, right? And you may see that some of these, like this one, commit commands or commit commands, commit, create a git commit. I could have used that just now for the git commit. Maybe I'll do it for the next time, but it uses something called Claude plugin. And ultimately, all of these things are just different ways of providing context to Claude Code. When you actually see Claude plugins, which I will do a video on later, you will see that it's really just a bunch of MD files with a bunch of scripts, right? And that's because the model, the LLM Claude, is so very good at reading plain text, natural language text, and converting that into either bash commands or outputs that it needs and the system needs, even in an agentic way. You can even run programs like that, right? It's extraordinarily powerful to understand how to put the right things in the context. So you have all these different commands here, these slash commands here, and we will cover some of these in later videos. I didn't mention this at the start because I was already logged in, but the first time you guys install this, you may need to log in. And like I did say in the previous video, you're probably better off getting at least the pro monthly, even if you're just trying it out for a month, and see how great it is. Now, you can actually take a look at your status. It'll tell you, here's my account, here's the organization, and you can see Claude Pro. It tells you, the various configurations I've used and the various sort of, my token usage and things like that. So you can see, for example, usage will give you, your plan usage limits and how much you've actually done. Context will visualize how much context you've used, and you'll see how much you've used, for which particular model. Okay, you've used 1.3 for the system prompts. A lot of tokens are used up in tools, but your memory file uses 2.5, or my memory file, Claude.md, uses 2,500 tokens, right? So that's a great way of seeing exactly what you've got going in your context at various points of time. You can do a /clear if you want to reset the context. If you're coming back from another session, in fact, let me see if I can do that, right? I'm going to Control C to exit again. Okay, and now I'm going to run Claude again, and I'm going to try and resume the old conversation I was having by doing /command resume a conversation. I honestly don't know which one it was, so I'm going to try and resume to the one with 1 minute ago, no prompt, right? And then if you want to do a compact, you can just do /compact here to compress it, but and keep a summary in the context, and you can see, even do a question mark to see all the shortcuts. Now, one thing I want to do show you is to add something to this memorize, right? So right now, you see that I added this stuff right at the end, general instructions to Claude Code. I'm going to put another general instruction there. Okay, let's do this. The memory that I'd like to add is when adding code to a file, if always add an explanatory comment when the code is long or complex or there is unclear reasons that code. Okay. And now, because I use the hashtag thing, that's adding to the memory, it's going to say, okay, I'll keep this in mind. I'm ready to help with any tasks related to echo private, blah, blah, blah. Great. The other thing you can do is if you do and you can do the files that you want. For example, if I want to look at files for rules or files based JSON or, any of these files, I could, for example, do at index, and then it'll give me all the index files that I have, whether it's in the front end or the back end and so on, and then you can add this to your context. So by doing at this file, and then if I do at index again on the front end, you will see, or if let's say I do the webhook index, you will see that I'm adding these two files to the context window specifically. Now I'm directing the attention of Claude, the model, to these files, putting them into the context so that Claude can read these files and do what it needs to do. For example, let's do the at webhook one, right? I could say, what does this file do, right? And now it's going to read, as you can see, that it's putting it into the context, and it's going to now summarize. So you can see it's read that file, the webhook index file, and it says it handles incoming webhooks from Zoho email. Here's what it does. It has a main function called mailhook, and all of this runs in Firebase functions, right? So that it has a particular API for that. It then verifies that webhook request to make sure that it's a secure webhook request from an expected webhook, and that it's not some sort of malicious webhook post data incident. It does a secret handshake, which is how it verifies the validity of the webhook, and then it processes the email, right? It processes incoming, it stores the email, it tells you everything that it does. Now, as you can imagine, this is a really great way to onboard onto a code base, right? Now, let's say I want to understand more about how this webhook works. So I can say, what is received by this webhook? When does it fire? Because what's happening here actually from memory is that anytime I send myself that email with the links I want in the digest at the end of the week, I need to be able to parse that email and extract the links. And I think that from memory, that's what this webhook does, right? So it says, here you go, the webhook receives a JSON payload. The webhook fires every time an email arrives at the Zoho email account configured, right, in the webhook settings. And then it parses that. Okay, so it does tell me what it does. It acts as the entry point for converting incoming emails into shareable links stored in the apps database. Now, let's say instead of using Zoho, which may have complexity with this webhook, I want to use another service that parses emails and extracts content from the emails to store in the database. And I want it to give me suggestions on other services that can do this. Let me just say, what other ways or services can I use to parse to achieve the same functionality if I didn't want to use Zoho? Now, pretty good typing for somebody with just half a hand, right? Okay, let's see what it says. So it's going to do some research, and it's going to give me some ideas. And this is a way for me to explain to you how you end up using Claude Code in your code base with deep knowledge of your code base to run agentic operations like web search, web fetch, reading your files, doing that multiple times in loops until it gets what it needs and then tells you what it needs. Now let's see what it says here, right? It says, here are the main alternatives to achieve email to link functionality, which by the way is a perfect summary of what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get the emails and extract only the links from that, right? So easiest way to do it is to use SendGrid inbound pass, receives emails via webhook, and it does a bunch of things, right? You can also do it using Gmail API, other APIs, or self-hosted solutions to that. So Mailgun or SendGrid inbound would be drop-in replacements for Zoho. Great. Let's assume you want to use SendGrid, okay? And I'm going to show you now how we can do some planning. I want you to plan the steps involved in migrating to SendGrid, as you suggest. What memory file would you recommend to store our to-do steps plan in? So I'm asking you two questions. Help me with the migration plan, to plan the, if you like, the sprint to convert from Zoho to SendGrid. And then where do we save that, right? So it says, I'll create a plan for migrating from Zoho to SendGrid based on the project structure in Claude.md. It recommends storing the to-do plan in a file at the root level. So it's recommending that file. That's fine. This keeps it visible at project root, easy to find, separate from, okay, it's given me its reasons. I actually agree with them. Now, do I want it to make changes in migration SendGrid? No. What I actually want to do is I want to create a folder called to-dos and put that file in there. So I'm going to say that. No, instead create a directory called to-do and store that file there. And now you can see it's calling bash tools. So this is why I wanted to show you this. To create a directory, what would we as a developer do? We'd probably do an make dir, create the directory, and then cd into it, etc. Now look what it did. It's going to run the command And now it says, do you want to proceed? And I'm going to say yes, and it's asking me for permission because it's a write operation. It's creating something. I'm going to say, yep, go ahead. Don't ask me again for make dir commands. And now you can see it's creating the migration plan file. Do you want me to make this editor migration SendGrid MD? Yes. Allow all edits during the session because previously I cleared the context. So, I cleared the permissions and it said, okay, I've created that. Inside the to-dos folder, let's take a look at that. I'm going to close out the terminal. I'm going to open a preview thing for Markdown so that you guys can see that a bit better. And you can see here's the migration plan on the right? Okay, it tells me I need to set up all that. I need to do that, configure the MX records. Okay, so there's quite a lot of off-code sort of setup required, which makes a lot of sense. And then I need to update the Firebase config with the SendGrid API key. Makes sense because Firebase functions are going to run it. So that's just the setup. Then the code changes. Great. This is going to create a new handler for the webhook, so a new endpoint function that the webhook will call because the current one is Zoho, which you can see here. You can see function source services webhook. If I look at functions, source, and if I look at services, so it's followed my directory structure. This is the directory structure I'd put in 5 years ago. I don't know if I'll do the same directory structure if I was doing this project now, but Claude Code knows to follow with what I'm working, right? So it says, okay, there's email, Slack, webhook, and there it's got, it knows that there's a Zoho mail one there, and it says, okay, we're going to do the same thing for SendGrid, and would create the new SendGrid one there, and would implement payload passing. Then it'll run a bunch of tests because I've got tests. It emphasizes testing as well because you can see that I've got tests in my directory here. And then it says, okay, deploy the Firebase function, webhook function to Firebase, and then you can clean up. That's great, right? You can remove the old one, update Claude.md, etc., and then update the README Claude, update the documentation. Super, right? Like it's a very detailed thing. I just need to follow this step by step. And I won't do it now because it'll take too much time, but I could actually pretty much do the first bits of that, of what it's asking me to do here with the setup, give it all this information, and then say, go ahead and handle phase 2, phase 3 on your own. But after each phase, show me your code. And so let me do a review of the code, and then I can do a PR with that. So I'm completely in control every step of the way, but the agentic code is actually making it work. And I could say, start with the tests. Let's make sure the tests pass, and then we keep building this out phase by phase, right? We could absolutely do all of that. So all of this, guys, to tell you that this is an extremely powerful tool, right? Claude Code is an extremely powerful tool. And in this particular video, all we did was create the init command, which then created this project level Claude Code file here. And from there, we've added a few more things. We've added a bit of a plan, all of this using the command line tool that is Claude Code, which understands our code base really well, which understands how we want to approach things, and off we go. Now, if you were completely new to a code base, you could actually say, and I'll say that here, actually, let me see what models I've got running. I think I'm running on the Haiku. Yeah, I'm running on Haiku 4.5 because I actually think it's really, really good for simple tasks. If I was doing that complex piece of coding where I said, okay, I'm going to let the agent just run away and do the code and send me the review bits, I would probably switch to Sonnet, right, for that one, because that's much better trained for deep agentic work. But for the kind of things I'm doing, which is really a lot of text generation and text reading, Haiku's fine. So I'm going to stick with Haiku for now. But what I'm going to say here is analyze this code base and tell me as a newbie to this code base what the app does and what entry points I should start with to understand the code. Now, this is me pretending I'm completely new to this code base, and I want Claude Code to help me understand what it is that this code base does. And you can see that it's summarized for me, right? Based on the Claude.md and the webhook file you asked about, here's a newbie's guide. Well, maybe I should have taken away that newbie's guide, the webhook file, or you could just fill up a new terminal and run Claude again, right? Because that new session of Claude can already access the Claude.md, so it'll have a completely pristine context. The previous question about the webhook file would not be there. So that was my mistake. I should have cleaned that up. But you see, Claude at least told me that it was taking it on. But it basically says, okay, this is what the app does. This is the email that it sends emails to, and then you can have that email parsed away and stored in a database. Tells you what the front end has, which port it runs on, tells you what the Firebase backend runs on and which port it can run on. It tells you how it handles the database connection, the data model definitions, the 3 main exports, which are fairly descriptive. It tells you the database is the Firestore, and it tells you the key data flows, which is what I personally tend to like to want to know when I'm new to a database is, okay, so somebody mails this, then a webhook is triggered, it processes the email that's incoming, it then processes the incoming, passes the HTML, saves links only to the Firestore collection, tells you which collection it is, and then a cron job, queries the Firestore for links from the last 2 weeks and generates HTML, sends an email via the node mailer. Yep. So this explains how I configure, users who are new to it. And then, here's a quick start learning path, right? You read this one on day 1, on day 2, read that, on day 3, read that. Like it's clearly knows how challenging onboarding to a new code base can be. And so it's clearly helping you with things like that. Now, if this was there when I joined Google, my life would have been dramatically different for my first 6 months. I would have gotten much more productive, much more quickly, which is kind of why I'm having this series of videos for you, is to let you guys know that the old way of coding is not necessarily the best way just because it's been done for a long time. You absolutely need to know your fundamentals really well. You need to be a strong engineer, but the tool now adds to your velocity like a jetpack, like you wouldn't believe, right? Finally, of course, it tells you the file references, the important ones, tells you where the API endpoints are, the weekly digest job, which is where the cron runs, all of that good stuff. And then it'll say, can you dive deeper into any specific part? So that was quite a lot to go into, right? And the key point for you to remember is that your Claude Code is a very powerful tool, and the Claude.md file is a great way to set the rules and the contract, if you like. It's not really a binding contract, but a set of rules of engagement between you and Claude Code about when you start. And the best time to do this is when you're exploring a completely new project. So what I'd recommend you do is think of a small to medium-sized open source project that you've always wanted to dive into. Get a monthly subscription to Claude Code just to try it out, to learn the tool, even if it's for just 1 month. If you can't afford to pay for it after that, that's fine, obviously, but try to get used to this tool. Clone that project, that open source project, and just get Claude Code to help you understand what the project is about. Now you can, if you want to give yourself homework, what I'd encourage you to do with the open source project is to just apply like let's say project local memory, right? Create a Claude local MD file. Even though they're saying it's deprecated, it'll still work for now. Or if you're watching this in 2026 and Claude local MD is really not working, just update the existing project memory Claude.md file. That'll be working for a while. And just say, assume I'm completely new. Assume that I don't understand anything about this project. Be a friendly team lead and explain this project to me as though I'm new to the team. And this is a particular goal I want to try and do. Then maybe pick up a GitHub issues from that open source project GitHub issues page and say, this is the issue that I'd like to fix. Give it the link. It'll go and fetch that GitHub issue for you. And then it'll tell you how to fix it. Like, I think open source contributions are just going to go through the roof now with things like Claude Code. And it'll really, really change the kind of impact you have in the industry. It'll also help you say on your resume that you've done open source contributions and that you use AI in your tooling. And of course, if you want to build on top of this, maybe you want to create a simple chat app against your resume or something like that, and let people interrogate your resume, like just a small little side project. But you can do all that using Claude Code to help architect that plan for you and help you win that way. Okay, so hope this was helpful for you. Please, if you think that this is valuable, please like and subscribe. Please tell your friends about it. I don't get paid for this stuff. My channel's still pretty small, but I'm really trying to help more and more of you understand that the AI engineer opportunity is a big one because it kind of levels the playing field. It's so new that even senior engineers don't know a lot about this stuff unless they're already working in the AI space. And so there's a huge opportunity for people who want to adopt AI in their work practices to be able to level up their skills and be as good as the experts on this in a year's time or so, if you're really committed to it. And the best way to do that is to get involved with these kind of projects, or at least start to use them. So like and subscribe. Tell me in the comments whether I did something well or didn't do something well, or tell me what else you'd like me to produce. And I will be doing more stuff on this in subsequent episodes. I'm planning a bunch of lessons. It may not be 12. I think the first video I said it was going to be 12, but I've combined these two, for example, right? So I really will probably next just jump straight to tools and permissions, or I may combine a couple of them. So this is a very high level lesson plan, but I will be covering other things like tools, permissions, custom slash commands, MCP servers, how to use sub agents, these other power use cases in future videos, and including Claude Code on the web, which is pretty cool. And then show you how you can take it from an individual team, developer to team adoption, if you want to do that in your team and have more influence, or if you're doing a hackathon, how to set up your hackathon for success by driving Claude Code adoption and so on and so forth. All right. Hope this was helpful, and I will see you next time. So thank you very much. Catch you later.
Just subscribe. You know you got to do it.